AIs talking with other AIs, making decisions, carrying out action, writing its own code. Welcome to the world of Agentic AI, the type of AI designed to act autonomously to meet your desired objective, even if you don't know how to make it happen yourself. Most AIs we're engaging with today are reactive. We prompt, it answers, but it can only go as far as you can guide it. That was exciting last year. The future of AI is agentic. It's proactive. It understands motives or goals, and it works with an army of AIs to execute on your behalf, all behind the scenes. This autonomy makes agentic AI powerful, but it also raises important questions about control, ethics, and accountability. While it's efficient to have systems that can operate independently, the challenge lies in ensuring these systems act within their intended boundaries. That's where agentic frameworks come into play, and that's what today's guests, Marc DeSantis and Andy Weisman, two leaders here at WWT who have begun building and implementing agentic architectures, are here to talk about. Marc and Andy will review the difference between agentic AI and generative AI, but they'll also detail how agentic frameworks extend the capabilities of large language models and how they went about building frameworks that make it all happen. We'll also get into the future of agentic AI and why, for now, we still need that human in the loop. This is the AI Proving Ground podcast from Worldwide Technology, everything AI, all in one place. I'm your host, Brian Felt. Let's get to it. Well, the first thing I think of when I hear AI agents or agentic framework is always Agent Smith, The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask you, is there any comparison or parallels between The Matrix and AI?
I think there is. And actually, if we think back to the first talk that I gave on this, so we were part of, the ATC platform team, and then we were asked to start this new team around AI. And Andy was the first person I called, and Andy was super excited about it. And we gave a builders call talk back in April of last year around this. And I was thinking about in the Matrix, there's that capability where they just kind of plug in, and then there's that famous scene where Keanu Reeves wakes up and he's like, "I know kung fu."
I know kung fu.
Yeah, and that's how I think of agents, because really what agents are is an extension of the LLM, right? So it's kind of, I think about it almost like a plug-in, right? So you're taking that LLM functionality that you get out of the box and you're just adding on to it. And so we gave a demo to the executives a few months ago and kind of did that I know kung fu thing with orders, because, out of the box, obviously you ask an LLM about a Worldwide Technology purchase order and has no idea what you're talking about. But then you add this agent into the mix, give it this capability, and all of a sudden it can start conversing and looking up orders and possibly creating orders, updating orders, things like that. So that's how I see it related to the Matrix.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that talk, you touched on semi-autonomous versus autonomous, and autonomous would be great to get there, but for now I think we're settling for that semi-autonomous.
Yeah, so with Agent Smith, like, people are always afraid of AI like coming to kill you, right? I don't think we're there yet. I think there was in the early parts of agentic design, the debate about how autonomous does it need to be in order to be considered an agent. And I think where people landed was, well, let's not have that debate right now. Let's kind of, instead talk about agentic approaches. So like within the realm of autonomous agent, but not fully autonomous. And yeah, everything that we're building is human in the loop. We're seeing, so Adam is our branded AI here at Worldwide. And everything that we're seeing is an assistant approach, right? So how do we use Adam as an assistant to our employees, to be able to extend their capabilities? And then what we're looking at doing here in the near future, so sometime in February, opening this up to our customers and partners so that we can give them that, personal AI assistant to all of their customer needs.
Yeah. Well, before we go into a deeper dive into those approaches, let's just level set here and talk. For those that may not be familiar, give us a little bit of a rundown on what the difference is between agentic frameworks, RAG, and then just traditional AI models as we've known them for years.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with RAG. So I think LLMs, right, everybody kind of knows they're trained on all the data that's out there, some of it that they have, copyright access to, some of it they don't. That's where some of the interesting lawsuits are coming in play. But in terms of RAG was created as a way to extend the knowledge base of the LLM, right? And the way it works is it's, I almost think of it kind of like a man-in-the-middle attack, right? Like you think you're talking to the AI, but instead we're going to take your prompt and we're going to deflect it over here for a minute. So we take your prompt, we throw it against a vector database, and then we retrieve the information that's relevant to that prompt. We take that, and maybe in our case, we're going to, limit the number of pieces of content that we give back to the LLM. So in our case, we take, some cases 10, maybe 20 pieces of information. We feed that back to the LLM. And then the LLM is really good at summarizing that information. So it can now answer your initial question, that prompt that you're sending it through, with all the context that you're providing coming out of that query. So now when we talk about RAG, we got to talk about some of the limits there, right? Because as we rolled out our first RAG implementation, people started to ask me a pretty basic question, which is, why doesn't it know how many labs are on our platform, right? Which you would think it would know that.
Do you know that?
Today, there are 306.
Very good.
Is that right?
No, I don't know. I think so. I think
yeah.
that's about right, yeah.
So the answering that question goes back to kind of that man-in-the-middle attack that I described, and I don't think anybody else would describe RAG that way, but
it's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, and in our case, like we are going to be looking against that vector database for the answer. And so if there's a piece of content out there that indicates the number of labs in the platform, it'll find that. And we actually have, there's one page out there from like 3 or 4 years ago that indicated a certain number of labs at the time. And so what normally happens when I ask that question is it gives you an answer as of 3 years ago, right? Which is not right. And so people wonder, like, why isn't it not smart enough to be able to answer this question? Like, I thought AI could do all of this, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to the way that RAG works. It's looking in that database to try to find content to answer the question. And when we look at agentic approaches, it's a very different approach. It's trusting that the agent has the tools available to it to either retrieve real-time information or take real-time actions against pieces of data or against, objects and functionality in your environment. So the way that Adam today in the agentic framework can answer that question is basically by training it that this is the API that you can call to retrieve the labs from the platform. And then this is the number that you can use to trust that this is the number of records coming back. So it's kind of similar to RAG in the sense that you're feeding that information into the context, but the query part of it, like the actual retrieval that's happening, is much more dynamic. And you're trusting the LLM itself to have the reasoning capabilities to figure out, what do I need to get? Like, what do I need? What tools are available to me? And what tools can I pull in order to extend that functionality?
Yeah. And Andy, what's behind the scenes there that allows those agents to, for lack of a better term, talk to one another? What's the glue that's allowing them to query AI agent to AI agent as opposed to human to an AI?
Yeah, in our case, the router drives a lot of that. So that's the router is a custom tool that we built to take the user's prompt and basically engage those agents based on which agents are best suited to answer the user's prompt, or those agents can then work together if that's needed to answer the user's prompt. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah.
And maybe talk about what the router is, because I think people think about routers as like networking devices.
Yeah.
In our case, it's a custom application, right, that's relying on function calling. So maybe talk about what an agent even is to the router.
Yeah. And so an agent is, it's a definition that we've made in a database. So basically, the router is just going to look up the definitions of these agents when a user makes a prompt, and the router is going to look at all of their descriptions and see what the different agents do, and answer the user's question based on that. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. We built a custom set of agents and our own agent framework, partly because there were some tools out there that do that. And they're powerful tools, but they're mostly all inclusive. So, a tool like AutoGen, for example, a very flexible tool, but you really need to stay in that ecosystem. And for us, we have a lot of custom data and a lot of custom APIs. And so we really needed to be able to apply our own security over the top of that. And so we don't really have that option with a tool like AutoGen. We really needed our own API for that.
Yeah. So maybe let's keep going into that. Like, so if we have the agent router is like kind of the first entry point, right? And then we have all these agents, and the agents are these configurations, like descriptions of functionality that's provided, right? So we have, an agent out there that knows how to query the platform. So, which is WT.com. We have an agent out there that knows how to update your profile, right, on WT.com, things like that. So we take all those agents, we feed them into a database, we ultimately feed them into the LLM, right? So we load those up into the system context as tools, right? And then maybe talk about how that works.
Yeah. So we haven't really touched on tools much. So Marc kind of mentioned tools are things you give the LLM, basically actions and abilities you give to the LLM. And so for our router is ultimately just an LLM call, but its tools are the other agents. And so it can communicate with them using natural language, just like we communicate with it. Just like we communicate with the LLM, the router can ask these agents different questions, and they'll respond to it just as if they're responding to us.
How many agents are we talking about? Because Marc, how you described it was you have an agent for how you can update your bio, which seems pretty small scale. Mm-hmm. So when I think of it as just that, are you talking about thousands of agents?
We've got about a dozen right now, and then plans for like immediate plans. I should say for maybe another half dozen. But yeah, I think all said and done, like by the end of this year, I would expect us to be in the realm of like 20 to 30 agents, something like that. And then within the agent, so it's kind of this 2-layer hierarchy. So the first layer is what Andy just described, which is the agents available to the router. And then once it knows which agent to pull in, there are different tools at the agent level. So one of our agents, for example, is like our Salesforce agent. And we just describe to the router what we use Salesforce for as a company. And then it can know that, okay, I need, in this case, to ask the Salesforce agent. So one of the questions we ask a lot is, tell me about our relationship with this customer. And so it'll go out to the Salesforce agent, ask it that question, and then the Salesforce agent knows, okay, I have, 20 tools available to me to be able to figure out, what I can tell about a particular customer. And so that could be bringing back a list of accounts. It could be bringing back a list of key contacts or notables, things like that. So, there's kind of that 2-level hierarchy that goes on within the mix. And the important thing, the thing to stress here is that is the magic that powers agentic architecture, right? That functionality was introduced early last year, and then refined, over the year. There are new models that come out, and a lot of people have been thinking, for example, that the newer OpenAI models like O1 and O3 are examples of agentic architectures. They're actually not. They're deep reasoning LLMs, deep reasoning models that take longer periods of time to answer a question, but they don't support tool use. So all the stuff we're talking about here with these tools as being plugins, the newer AI or the newer OpenAI models don't support that. So for tool usage, we're still using GPT-4o. And then, on the open source front, you have Llama 3.2 and then the subsequent models on the Llama side that are geared towards function calling and trying to refine that experience. But the thing, going back to Andy's point around the framework, so whether it's, Crew AI or, AutoGen or, some of these other ones that are out there, like part of it is, making use of your existing investments. So we have a ton of investment, in APIs as a company that we've made over the last, say, 10 to 15 years. We wanted to continue to utilize that rather than starting from scratch. And then the other part of it is we wanted to use AI as an enabler into the development teams. And so AutoGen is an example of a framework that is Python based. And, from a development standpoint, most of our custom application is done in JavaScript. So we didn't want to push out to all the development teams like, hey, here's a new way to kind of AI enable your application, but you have to build that extension in a language that you're not familiar with. So JavaScript has come a long way within the AI space over the last year, because I think, they realize that it's not just data scientists using these LLMs anymore. It is, kind of your traditional full stack web developers. And so that was kind of one of the main points for us.
And just to expand on that a little, we'd also have some tools already built in Python that were working well. And so this framework, being technology agnostic, goes a long way into utilizing those already, right? And so you can really have teams building things in different languages when it's just natural language over HTTP communicating. You know?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so especially from an API standpoint, we don't...
A lot of flexibility.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what your API is built in. But yeah, from an agent definition standpoint, it is pretty much low code at this point, right? It's just, you just go in and build like a JSON document.
With still allowing you to... so we call that a managed agent. You can also have an unmanaged agent, which will let you build a full-on solution. Because there are times when you do want to write the code, right? Like there's times when, I don't want to trust the LLM to get these arguments right because they're too important, or there's something specific I need to do. And so...
and is that a maturity thing, or what are the pros and cons between the managed and unmanaged?
I think a lot of it depends on the APIs that you're engaging with.
Maybe give an example of...
Yeah, so as one example, if I wanted to make sure that I was making an API call as the user, and that user was that user ID is a parameter for that API call, our framework gives you a way to hard code parameters, but it doesn't give you a way to do that dynamically, right? Like I couldn't hard code, make this call as Marc every time. And so if I really had to do that, if there was some reason why I really had to do that, that would be a reason where I'd have to build my own tool and, integrate that way.
Yeah. And you're talking primarily about like integrating probably with a third party, right? Where we don't have control over the author. Yeah. So in our case, like we're doing a lot of very quick work utilizing the, authorization model that we have in place already for our custom applications. So, building an agent on top of existing APIs within our stack are, pretty simple. But yeah, to Andy's point, like if I wanted to pull in, Microsoft Teams or, Copilot is a good example there. Like we keep being asked, like, how do we integrate Copilot into, the custom solution into Atom? And that would be, an example of that where you would actually need to build, some code to handle the authentication side of that.
Andy, Marc mentioned how he brought you in early, and you've been helping lead kind of the agentic frameworks for our organization. If somebody's out there listening right now and just starting to do similar type work, what are some of the key components of that architecture that they need to consider?
Yeah, well, it starts with the LLM, certainly. And the most tempting thing is, I'm going to figure out how to train a model, right? Like that's what everyone wants to do. There's lots of neat things you can do in that space. But for me, I kind of fast forwarded. That's what I tend to do that from time to time. And so I kind of fast forwarded and just used what was out there. And I will say you can get pretty far with what's out there. We're still not doing a whole lot of training. You know, we're utilizing models that already exist. And so, yeah, so your LLM as a service somewhere. And then that goes a long way. And then the rest of it's about, I guess, what would you say? Just
streaming.
Oh man, streaming. Thank you.
Streaming is the trickiest part, right?
Streaming was streaming is, you know, these chat tools, you ask them, you prompt them, and then they start giving you an answer token by token, right? Mm-hmm. So they're streaming back the response. So that is, I mean, it's a great UI solution to the issue that these things take a while to run. And so to do that, though, your code has to stream. You have to stream from the LLM, whatever that service is, from that provider, all the way out through your UI, which means you're doing server-side events, and if you're a JavaScript nerd like us, you're doing async generators, which is just stuff that most of us don't really use that often. And so that was pretty painful. So I would say bone up on your streaming and good luck with that. And don't ignore it, because it's needed. It's necessary for a good experience.
And isn't the reason that was so complicated was because you're not just streaming text back to the screen, right? Like in the function calling world, you're also streaming back your function calls, right? So you kind of have to understand, like, is it giving me an answer that I want to stream back to the user, or is it giving me my next function call?
And as it's giving you your next function call, then what it's doing is, you can imagine that's an object with properties and values, a token at a time. Mm-hmm. And so you're having to then reassemble that into something that,
exactly.
It gets a little ugly.
Yeah, because the tricky thing, like maybe that's not super intuitive for people that haven't done it before, is the LLM's not making the calls, right? Mm-hmm. So when we say function calling or tool usage, it's just telling you which tool to use, and it's giving you the parameters with which to use that tool.
Okay.
So if I give it an example of like get current weather, right? And I say the inputs into that function are like the city and maybe the weather, like whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, right? Like the unit of measure. Then it's going to come back with, get current weather, passes you, the parameters. So St. Louis, Missouri, Fahrenheit. And then you have to take that information and go off and make the call itself, and then give the output of that call back to the LLM.
Okay.
And so that's what Andy's talking about, in terms of streaming that information back. You need to understand, is this stream meant for the machine or is it meant for the user? And then if it's meant for the machine, how do I take that, make the call, get the call back? And in some cases, it's going to be a complex chain of conversation that's happening where the LLM might take the output of one agent and use that as the input into another one. Mm-hmm. So that's where a lot of the cool stuff happens, where we see these agents kind of talk to each other. But when you're trying to do all that in a reality where the LLMs still aren't quick enough as we want them to be, you got to deal with streaming.
Yeah. So you have your architecture built, your framework built, and I'm sure it's an ongoing process. What do the users do at this point? Is it an upskilling? Is it just is it an instant productivity enhancer? Walk me through kind of like, hey, we're bringing this to a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe we'll talk about two different groups of users. So the first would be like the actual users of the tool. So one of the things we've done there is just to make it easier for everyone to get access to it, as we've integrated this functionality directly into wwt.com. And so rather than going out to a separate tool, it's all right there, and you get some cool functionality from there where, this widget now has the context of the page that you're on. And so you can just ask it things like summarize this page and, or even the video, like summarize this video, like it has access to all that information. So that's cool. And then what we're doing throughout the platform is we're adding in these UI elements that are kind of call to action elements that engage the AI widget. Mm-hmm. And so you click on a call to action element within the page, and Adam's going to come up and it's going to start responding to that. And so it could be, help me with determining the next SD-WAN product for my organization, or, explain, what are the next steps for me, after completing this learning path, things like that. So from a user perspective, the hope is that it's intuitive. The nice thing is you can always, as a user, ask it what it can do for you. Mm-hmm. So because Adam has access to all these agents and these tools, you can just ask it questions about them. So that's kind of nice. Now, from a delivery team standpoint, which is kind of as an AI COE team, like those are our stakeholders, right? We're trying to work with them. Really, like what we just described with the agentic approach of designing out these configuration files that we use for agents, it's becoming hopefully kind of that new user interface that they can engage with. So we've always thought about the web app and our mobile app as kind of the two user interfaces that we're designing for, and now you're talking about this third user interface, which is the AI chat experience. And so we're trying to make that as easy as possible for teams to onboard into. We don't have an agent builder quite yet, like a UI for that, but that's in the works for this year. And then, ultimately it's taking the smart folks that we have in this team and kind of embedding them out into all of these delivery teams so that they can help deliver, these products. So we're working on, things like order status and, continued support for Salesforce, and we've got some new things going on with lifecycle management, and there's just lots of requests coming in, and we're trying to field them all.
Which is, part of what's nice about the agentic framework is the agents being separate the way they are. It sort of gives you this this nice line of delineation of scaling this out to other development teams, right? Like these different teams can sort of work on their own agents and be contributing to this platform and be the, plug it into the matrix business, right?
Yeah.
Like adding new skills. And so hopefully it starts to scale like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Point. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And the thing that we need to be conscious of is making sure that, those descriptions are tuned well so that there's not a whole lot of confusion and overlap, because we have seen that, through our testing is, if the description of an agent is too generic, it'll always get pulled in, or sometimes it'll never get pulled in, right? So we need to make sure that as new agents are brought into the mix, that it's contributing to the success of Adam and like to the success of the answers, because if you're just making these agent calls that ultimately aren't helpful, the way that things work today is it's waiting for all of those agents to respond back before the user sees a response. And so we want to make sure that, only the agents that are really relevant to the conversation are being engaged.
Yeah. Well, so a little bit of a future question. So you mentioned, Andy, scaling this with other development teams who can then add their own agents. So is that kind of where you see the future of development teams going? Is this team is going to add Kung Fu and this team is going to add a helicopter or, whatever it might be for the IT space?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it exactly. Yeah. And that's, I would say, what our goal is and what our job is to make that easy, right? To make that easy and repeatable, and so that as new things are added, we want to ensure that it makes the overall product better instead of worse, like that kind of thing,
Yeah. And I think there's two parts. Like one is continuing down that path. The other one is continuing down a similar path, but where we integrate AI into our applications. Yeah. So that you're doing something within an application. Maybe you don't even know that AI is the thing behind it. I think that's where AI, often maybe doesn't get the accolades, but like provides the biggest bang for the buck, And so we've been doing stuff like, with marketing around, content creation for a while, like where AI is kind of central, into some of that. And then right now we're doing a whole lot related to events and event creation, to be able to create events based on Outlook emails and, lots of ways of kind of augmenting, the event creation experience using AI that isn't a chat.
Yeah.
And once you have the framework, there's a whole lot you can do with the agents, right? Like the router is going to so the chat is a really nice feature, right? Your personal assistant, like that's fantastic. But where that router really starts to seeing is when you can give it really long prompts, do this, then this, then this, then use that to do this, like that sort of thing, where users, sure, some power users may be able to do that, but when we start doing that programmatically within our apps is when like things will really start to work. Yeah.
Well, Andy, you mentioned hopefully it scales when you're talking about the development teams plugging in agents. What are the challenges that you foresee or already know about in terms of getting to that scalability?
Yeah, so earlier Marc mentioned those descriptions. Ultimately, the router is making the decision on what agents to engage based on the descriptions of those agents. So that alone, if somebody puts a description saying always engage me every time anyone asks anything about anything, right? Like that's not really how you want the system to work. And so that's I think a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and even like,
not that anyone's going to put that specific description, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think we're doing our own, kind of exploration around like the granularity around the agents and trying to figure out, how do we maybe think less about how we are organized, and this has been a challenge for most of the projects I've ever worked on. Like, even with like, WT.com and the platform, like we often want to present concepts out to the world that reflect the hierarchy of our organization, but it doesn't necessarily, make sense to external folks, right? And so
a lot of times, sorry to cut you off,
yeah.
A lot of times when I'm, we're after a certain outcome and we're not getting there, and then I really take a step back and I look at what we're doing. I'm like, this wouldn't make sense to me as a human, right? Like,
right.
So that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, like so Salesforce is an example, right? So we were just talking about this the other day, like, if you're asking a question about a contact, right? So this is like a contact record. So information about maybe an employee, more likely a customer contact. Why would you think that you had to go to the Salesforce agent to ask that, right? That's just how we have it organized. We're using Salesforce as our tool for contacts, but maybe it would make more sense to have an agent that's specific to contacts. Mm-hmm. And if there's other functionality, because we do a ton of, customer related contact information that is not in Salesforce. Like we augment that with other systems all the time. So maybe it would make more sense to have an agent that just focus on contacts, and a portion of that is Salesforce, but then there's all the other capabilities as well. So it's kind of this taxonomy that we'll continue to refine over time.
Yeah. The way the two of you are talking right now, it sounds, at least to me, like it's a pretty autonomous process with the AI agents, but you had already mentioned human in the loop. So touch on that a little bit. Where are we at in terms of human on the loop, and what is still left up to developers, and where is that kind of going in the near future?
There are probably lots of examples of that at varying degrees. So one example is we have an agent that deals with some analytics, and it can have tons and tons of data, which is expensive. It just is. If you're having the LLM constantly looking at all that, and then also outputting that, those output tokens are expensive. And so part of that agent's instructions are try to avoid running reports unless a specific user specifically asks for it. And if you're about to run it, confirm with them that that's what they want. And so that's kind of maybe a trivial example, but that's one where it's like, try not to spend our money,
Yeah. And I think a lot of it does come down to the instructions that we're giving it. Because even in the example that I mentioned earlier with updating your profile, we're giving that agent instructions to say, don't actually write the information until you've confirmed it with the user. Whereas we could just say, when I'm asking for a new profile, just take your best guess at a profile for Brian and write it back to his record. And that's not something that we really trust the AI enough with at this point.
And I'll say, like, this is an area where it's like, your question earlier about tips for doing your own framework. Like, tip number one is like, don't write your own framework, right? Like, so we don't really have a pattern for this other than using instructions, but there are, like, LangChain has a system for this where it's like this whole like confirmation flow that it, you kind of trigger, don't do this action unless they, require confirmation basically. And it's got a flow for that. And so like, those are things that's areas of maturity for us, I guess. Right.
So you don't think we should have written our own framework?
Oh no, I do. But we have a lot of specific needs, right? Like, if you imagine all of the, a lot of things want you to put all of the skills and actions all together in one place. And that alone just felt like a deal breaker for me because I don't know how we do that and then secure them based on our security.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Well, the two of you had already mentioned some tools here. So you just mentioned LangChain. I think you said earlier Llama Index. What other tools are we considering or using or?
I mean, the tool that comes to mind for me is LangFuse, which is less about actually getting the desired outcome and more about like analyzing what happened. So it's, LangFuse, it's an open source tool that lets you track and trace and do those kinds of things. And so you can do open telemetry, like, tracking spans and durations of events. And by doing that, you can sort of stack these complex pipelines, so user asked this, agent saw this, router saw this, so router engaged these agents based on that. Those agents engaged these tools based on what the router asked them, and as it came back up through the pipeline, it gives you. It's one of those things that, like, I would have thought in most applications, open telemetry is nice, but kind of optional. Whereas in an AI application, it's just not optional. You just have to have something that gives you that insight. And then on top of all that, I think the part that's probably the nicest is it breaks all that down by cost. So you can see what agents cost. You can see what different users are spending, like that kind of thing.
So with function calling tool use, we're making heavy use of that, and we're kind of relying on the ability to have parallel function calling happening. Mm-hmm. So that way,
you can imagine if you have the router whose agents are tools, you want to be able to call them in parallel.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you don't want to wait for one to finish and then go on to the next one.
Well, we're certainly not the only organization or company building these frameworks. Lots of others out there. How closely are you paying attention to what's happening externally? What are we learning or taking away from those entities?
We're constantly evaluating, like, should we bring in other tools, or is the custom path that we're on like the right path? And obviously we have a lot of third-party products, just kind of always looking towards the big players in the industry to see what they're doing.
And trying to take that into consideration while we're building our framework also, right? Like, it's different pieces, like you have the router and then you have the agents themselves. We're trying to set the agents up to where they would make sense in a different ecosystem also, right? Like, maybe agents at some point become custom co-pilots, There's a lot of just trying to make the decisions that make sense at the time, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. What's the ultimate end state or desired state here? Is it that folks like me can, in plain text, go and just ask for something and something super technical gets whipped up? Is it to, make our dev teams uber productive, all of the above? Do we have a set of established goals? And that's probably going to seg into the center of excellence in terms of, how we see the vision here.
Yeah, I think so. AI productivity is something that, every employee and customer can benefit from. When it comes to employees, there's plenty of tools out there that people are using that are AI enabled. We do have some developers that are using Atom to kind of help with software development. That's probably not a best practice, or really like not really a use case we've thought a whole lot about, because there are tools out there like, GitHub Copilot that we're using. Andy actually uses another tool. What is it called?
Cursor,
yeah. So those tools are really making a lot of headway in regards to software development. But yeah, I think in terms of where we could go with Atom and the Agentic framework is definitely providing, a top-notch customer experience, right? So as much as possible, automating complexity away, using agents. But then, yeah, for employees, like our goal for this year is really to try to, I don't know if consolidate's the right word, but at least reduce the complexity around the number of AI tools that are out there. Because we do have a lot of possibilities for where we could go. And so I was talking with one of our sales teams today, and they have things that they are updating constantly within Salesforce, as an example. So creating notables and updating IRs and all these, objects that they're creating and updating all day long. They would love for Adam to help, ease that complexity there. So we're trying to sort out how do we do that using the right tool, giving employees the right experience to be able to, make it easy for, that employee on day one to know, how do I engage with our personal AI assistant?
So what's coming up next for AI agents? If the analogy that you gave was that you plug in and you get to learn Kung Fu, well, we know how the next 2 or 3 matrices turned out. It gets a little hairy. So what are we going to see? Are we going to start seeing autonomous agents talking to one another behind the scenes and we just don't even know it? Or, what is going on?
I think it's going to, I think some of that remains to be seen, but I'll say, I think that what we're going to see next is people are going to start actually becoming more effective with these tools. I think that's the first thing that's going to happen. The tools are going to make everyone's life better. I know as a developer, they're making my life better. And, at first it was just, now it's making my output better. And now it's really becoming more like this is becoming easier and easier and easier. And so I think we're going to start seeing that happen for people. But yeah, at some point, 100%, like not here's the configuration of our agent. We're going to stop doing that. And it's going to be more like, here's what our ecosystem looks like. Here's where you can find all of our open API specs. Go ahead and build agents for us that make sense, right? Like, I don't think that's right around the corner, but I do think that that's coming.
The 2 things that come to mind for me would be like increased performance, because I still think, they're slower than we want them to be. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that are going to come into play to achieve performance there. But one of the things we've been talking about is when we take all of the different interactions we have with the LLM, how do we figure out which of those could be offloaded to smaller models, right? Smaller, more purpose-driven models that can help even, just the initial agent selection that happens, right? That doesn't have to be ChatGPT 4.0, right? Like, how do we use a smaller model for some of these things? And then obviously the models are just going to continue to be faster anyway. So I think performance is a big piece of where things are headed. But also, right now in our environment, and I think in most environments, the chat experience is textual, right? Like entirely textual. Maybe you can upload documents, but you can't really output stuff in multiple formats. I think that's a lot of what we've been asked for is how do we have the ability to, say, create a PowerPoint presentation out of this information?
Yeah, that's the more grown-up answer, and that's probably right. But I'm ready, man. I'm ready for the autonomous stuff to start happening. Yeah.
Well, great. That was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate the 2 of you stopping by and sharing your insight and your wisdom. Certainly way more know-how than I can ever put on the matter. So thanks for stopping by and joining, and good luck with the development moving forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Okay, another big thanks to Marc and Andy for joining me today on the show. They've got tons of great inside knowledge on how AI can and should be implemented enterprise-wide, and I'm sure a few battle scars on how it shouldn't be adopted. So we'll have them back on the show to talk more for sure. A few key lessons to consider as you think about AI agents within your organization. First, it's fun to think about AI capabilities, but don't forget about AI limitations. While these models can provide powerful capabilities, they can still struggle with basic factual knowledge or require additional safeguards around making autonomous decisions. Second, architecture and tooling. Building effective AI agent frameworks requires careful architectural planning and the right supporting tools. Managing agent interactions, maintaining security and control all of these and more need to be addressed throughout your framework design. And finally, iterative improvement and scaling. Implementing AI agents is an ongoing process of refinement and scaling. It's certainly not a one-and-done activity. You'll be continuously working to improve performance, expand capabilities beyond just text-based interactions, and make the system more scalable and accessible to a broader set of users within your organization. Successfully deploying AI agents requires a balance of technical implementation, understanding the technology's current limitations, and an iterative approach to gradually expand the capabilities of the reach of the system. If you're looking for an even deeper dive on any of these themes, we have a ton of resources and research available on WWT.com that provide a practical, actionable way forward. And if you like this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast, please consider leaving a review or rating us, and please consider subscribing. This episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast was co-produced by Naz Baker, Stephanie Hammond, and Mallory Shaffrin. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch. My name is Brian Felt. We'll see you next time.